After the fall of Ur, chaos ruled. But on the banks of the Euphrates, a small town named Babylon began to dream of greatness.
The Amorites came from the west, nomads, warriors, seeking a home in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia.
They did not destroy, they built. Under the Amorite kings, Babylon began to fortify itself against a hostile world.
But Babylon was small. Surrounded by giants like Larsa and Isin, it struggled just to survive.
They worshipped Marduk, a local god for a local city, waiting for his time to rise above the ancient pantheon. Survival depended on water. The kings of Babylon became masters of irrigation, turning the desert green. Trade brought wealth. Babylon sat at the crossroads of the river, taxing the boats that carried the lifeblood of Sumer. For a century, they built quietly. Then, in 1792 BC, a young prince ascended the throne, Hammurabi, a name that would become synonymous with law. But first, he had to be a warrior.
He was a master of diplomacy. While his armies were small, his intellect was vast. He used words as weapons.
He allied with Shamshi-Adad of Assyria and Zimri-Lim of Mari, waiting for the right moment to strike.
Before conquering others, he strengthened his own home. He raised the walls of Babylon and restored the temples. The test came from the east. The Elamites invaded, threatening to crush the squabbling city-states. Hammurabi convinced his rivals to unite. Together, they drove the Elamites back to the mountains. But the alliance was short-lived. Seeing Larsa weak from the war, Hammurabi turned south. One by one, the ancient powers fell. Larsa, Isin, Uruk. The south was unified under Babylon. He turned on his old friend Zimri-Lim of Mari. Sentiment has no place in empire building.
Mari was sacked. Its magnificent palace was burned, but its clay archives were baked by the fire, preserving the history of the age.
Mesopotamia was whole again. Babylon was no longer a town. It was the capital of the world.
As Babylon rose, so did its god. Marduk became the king of heaven, just as Hammurabi was king of earth. Wars ended. A Pax Babylonica settled over the land. But Hammurabi knew that swords alone could not keep the peace.
He sought to be remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a shepherd of justice, the king of righteousness. He ordered a pillar of black diorite to be brought to the city, a stone that would carry his voice forever.
On its summit, an image was carved, the king receiving the rod and ring of authority from Shamash, the god of justice.
Below the image, 282 laws were inscribed, not in Sumerian, but in Akkadian, the language of the people.
It was placed in the public square, a visible guarantee that the strong should not oppress the weak.
Justice was no longer arbitrary. It was written, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
For crimes without witnesses, the river god decided. To survive the waters was to be declared innocent. The laws covered everything. If a builder built a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder was put to death.
Doctors operated with fear and precision. To save a life brought silver. To cause injury brought the loss of a hand.
Code regulated the family. Marriage, divorce, inheritance. The household was the microcosm of the state. Babylonian women held rights often lost in later ages. They could own property, trade, and testify in court. The economy was managed. The code set minimum wages for workers and fixed prices for the rental of oxen.
But justice was not equal. The law distinguished between the awilum, the mushkenum, and the slave.
Beyond the law, the mind of Babylon flourished. They mastered mathematics, calculating square.
They counted in 60s. Because of them, we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle.
They were the first great astronomers. They catalogued the stars, predicting eclipses to divine the will of the gods.
They created the lunar calendar, organizing time itself to regulate the harvest and the festivals.
Babylon became the heir of Sumer. In its schools, the old stories of Gilgamesh.
The city was a masterpiece of planning. Straight streets, distinct districts, a metropolis of order in a chaotic world.
Gardens bloomed within the walls. The desert heat was kept at bay by the shade of palms and the flow of water.
Every year, the king took the hand of Bel-Marduk, renewing his divine right to rule during the Akitu festival.
But anxiety lay beneath the order. The Babylonians were obsessed with omens, constantly asking the gods, will this last?
Hammurabi grew old. He had united the land, written the law, and built the city. But he had no equal to succeed him.
In 1750 BC, the great king died. The sun set on the golden age of Babylon. His son, Samsu-iluna, took the crown. But the empire was a heavy burden for one man to hold.
Immediately, the south rebelled. The cities Hammurabi had conquered sought to break free from Babylon's grip.
Samsu-iluna fought bravely, but the wars were endless. The unity of Mesopotamia began to fracture.
Economic collapse followed war. The southern cities, the cradle of civilization, were slowly abandoned.
Weakness invites predators. From the Zagros Mountains, the Kassites watched the declining empire with hungry eyes.
While the borders shrank, the mind of Babylon expanded. They turned their eyes to the stars, seeking order in the heavens that they lost on earth.
They mapped the zodiac. The constellations we know today, Leo, Scorpio, Taurus, were first drawn by Babylonian hands.
Time was sacred. They divided the day and night, creating the 24-hour cycle that still governs the modern world.
Mathematics was not just for counting sheep. They solved complex quadratic equations, pushing the boundaries of abstract thought.
Medicine was a dual art. The physician treated the body with herbs, while the exorcist treated the soul with incantations.
They invented the loan, the contract, and interest. The merchant princes of Babylon wielded power that rivaled the king.
Daily life revolved around bread and beer. Brewing was a respected trade, often run by women, the keepers of the tavern.
They told stories of order defeating chaos. The Enuma Elish celebrated Marduk's victory over the dragon.
Religion was not just for the high temples. Small clay gods protected the humble homes of the poor.
Every citizen had a name and a seal. Personal identity was etched in stone, a mark of individuality in the ancient mass.
But while culture flourished, the empire was dying. The south had gone silent. In the marshes, a rebel kingdom arose, the Sealand dynasty. They cut Babylon off from the sea and the trade routes. Without the wealth of the south, inflation gripped Babylon. The silver shekel lost its power. The great cities of Sumer, Uruk, Ur, Nippur, were abandoned.
Babylon stood alone, a life raft in a drying ocean. The population swelled with refugees, but the food supply dwindled.
The later kings struggled to maintain the walls. The golden age of Hammurabi was a distant memory.
Eyes watched from the north. The Hittites, a rising power in Anatolia, heard rumors of Babylon's gold and its weakness.
Samsu-ditana, the last heir of Hammurabi, sat on a throne of dust. He had the title, but not the power.
He prayed to Marduk. But the gods usually favor the strong battalions. In the mountains of Anatolia, the Hittites forged their weapons. They were coming not to rule, but to raid.
1895 BC, King Mursilia I of the Hittites marched south. A lightning strike aimed at the heart of the world.
Their chariots were heavy, unstoppable. They smashed through the border defenses of Babylon.
The alarm was raised too late. The enemy was already at the gates.
For the first time in centuries, foreign boots stood on the sacred soil of Babylon. The walls that Hammurabi built were breached. The age of law ended in violence. The Hittites did not come to stay. They came to loot. The sack of Babylon was brutal and swift.
Centuries of accumulated wealth, the tribute of the known world, was stripped away in a single day.
They took the ultimate prize. The statue of Marduk himself was carried off to Anatolia. Babylon was left godless.
As Mursili marched back to the north, he left behind a smoking ruin. The dynasty of Hammurabi was extinguished.
Silence fell over the city. But Babylon was too important to die forever.
Into the void stepped the Kassites. They would rule Babylon for the next 400 years.
They did not change Babylon. Babylon changed them. They rebuilt the temples and worshipped Marduk.
Eventually, even the god returned. Babylon rose from the ashes, proving it was the eternal city.
The empire fell, but the law remained. The stele of Hammurabi survived, carried. Its words echoed through time. Eye for an eye, a concept of proportionate justice that shaped the Bible and Roman law.
The presumption of innocence, the requirement of evidence. These seeds were planted in the soil of Babylon.
They gave us the 60-second minute and the 360-degree circle. We measure our world with their numbers.
When we look at the stars, we see the same patterns the priests of Babylon mapped from their ziggurats. The mud bricks have dissolved. The great walls are mounds of dust.
But the idea of Babylon, the city of law, the center of the world, never died. Hammurabi promised that his name would be remembered forever. He kept his promise. Civilizations rise and fall like the floodwaters, but the foundation of law remains.
Old Babylon fell, but it built the bedrock of human society.
They were the first to live by a written code, the first citizens of a state ruled by law.
The Lion of Babylon sleeps, but its roar still echoes in our courtrooms and our schools.
Hammurabi, the king of justice. The sun sets on the first golden age. And the desert reclaims its own. This was Old Babylon.
But Babylon refused to die. Under the Kassite kings, the city rose again, surviving for another 4 centuries.
The Kassites brought stability. They set up Kuduru stones, granting land eternally to the people, protected by divine curses.
In the quiet of the temples, scribes like Sinlekunini compiled the standard version of Gilgamesh, the first great epic of humanity.
They preserved the memory of the Great Flood, a story of divine wrath and human survival that would echo later in the Bible.
Innovation continued. Babylonian artisans mastered the chemistry of glass, creating colors that rivaled precious stones. They fell in love with the horse. Under the Kassites, the horse became a symbol of nobility and speed. Babylonian kings corresponded with pharaohs as equals. Their letters, found in Egypt, reveal a brotherhood of great powers.
The trade routes remained open. Babylon was the beating heart that pumped blood to the extremities of the ancient world.
Cataloged the human body. The diagnostic handbook listed thousands of symptoms, laying the groundwork for clinical observation.
They understood the circle. They calculated the value of pi with remarkable accuracy, centuries before the Greeks. They saw animals in the stars. The zodiac we use today is a direct inheritance from the priests of Babylon.
Knowledge removed fear. Because they could predict eclipses, they were no longer terrified by the darkening sun. They created the first dictionaries. Lexical lists translated words across languages, building bridges of understanding.
The law protected the vulnerable. A widow could not be cast out. Her property was hers to keep.
Family was defined by law, not just blood. Adoption contracts ensured that every child had a name and a future. They understood capital. The concept of compound interest drove the economy, though it often trapped the poor in debt.
But wise kings knew the danger. Periodically, they declared a misharum, wiping the slate clean and freeing debt slaves.
They left us the world's oldest recipes. Rich stews of lamb, garlic, and herbs, flavors that still linger in the region. They wrote down music. We can still hear the echoes of their hymns, the oldest written melodies in history.
Babylon became more than a city. It became an idea, the gate of the gods, the center of the civilized world. Even when the Assyrians conquered it 1,000 years later, they bowed before its temples. Babylon was too sacred to destroy.
The spirit of Old Babylon lived on. Nebuchadnezzar would later build a new empire on the foundations laid by Hammurabi.
Its ziggurat reached for the heavens, inspiring the biblical legend of the Tower of Babel.
By the rivers of Babylon, the exiled Judeans wept. But they also learned.
Alexander the Great wanted it as his capital. He died within its walls, the last great conqueror to fall under its spell.
But eventually, the river shifted. The trade routes moved. Babylon was abandoned to the wind.
For 2,000 years, it was just a mound of mud, a name in a book, a warning to the proud.
But the stones speak. The Code of Hammurabi was found, broken but legible, a voice from the deep past.
They saw themselves as the center of the world. And for a brief, shining moment, they were.
The principle remains that law must be written, that justice must be public, that the strong must not oppress the weak. Hammurabi was a man of his time, ruthless, ambitious, pious. But he built something that outlasted his empire. The Euphrates still flows. The mud of Babylon still yields crops.
Empires turn to dust, but life continues. The rhythms of the harvest are the true heartbeat of Mesopotamia.
Every time a child learns to write, they walk in the footsteps of the Babylonian scribes.
Every time we weigh evidence, we honor the legacy of the Amorite king. Every minute of our lives is divided by Babylonian math.
Babylon was the lion of the ancient world. Fierce, proud, and undeniable. Babilim, the gate of the gods. A bridge between heaven and earth.
In clay, they wrote their destiny. In brick, they built their protection. In gold, they honored their gods. And in stone, they carved their justice. The Old Babylonian Empire is gone. The voices are silent. The kings are dust. But the code stands, a monument to the human desire for order in a chaotic world.
The shepherd king still watches over his flock. May Shamash, the great judge of heaven and earth, shine upon his deeds.
A new day dawns on the Euphrates. Babylon, the city that will never be forgotten.